the what happened conversation, the feelings conversation, and the identity conversation. And if you don't know what that means, probably our listeners need to go and listen to that.
We'll catch them up.
Yes, yeah. We'll catch them up. But as we get started, on a lighthearted note, can you share with our podcast audience which layer is the most challenging for you personally and why?
And again, for those of you who missed last week's podcast, these 3 levels are the what happened part of the conversation that we're all good at. Your son or daughter comes home from school and they're mad and you say, what happened? Tell me what happened. Or there's a conflict with somebody and you need to talk about what happened because something bad happens. That's where we enter the conflict.
And often stop.
And stop, right. It never goes past that. And then we walk away thinking, hey, we handled that pretty well. And then they're not okay and you don't know why they're not okay. And it's because of these other 2 levels that Sheila talks about. Then there's the emotional level, and then, as you said, the identity level. And I've had to learn the second level, the emotional level. We can talk about that. The third level, the identity level, was brand new to me listening when I read the book. That just, again, opened so many doors that explained conversations that I've had, especially at work. But moving back up to the emotional part of the conversation, as I mentioned last week, I actually took a little seminar on empathetic listening that I was terrible at. And if I go with my natural flow, I forget to do this. And empathetic listening is basically where you listen for emotion, where you say, wow, you're so frustrated right now, and I can understand why. You're really angry with me right now, and I get it. You name that emotion, you affirm the emotion, and when somebody affirms our emotion, we feel like we're understood.
Yeah, it releases some of the energy.
It does. It releases some of the energy, but again, the temptation is to just stick with what happened. Okay. So when I learn this, and when I remember this, it just makes difficult conversations easier because I'm give the other person permission to feel what they're feeling, and that just helps. And when people do that for me, that helps as well. But it's not intuitive for most of us. Some people it is, but the rest of us, it's just something we have to remember.
Well, it's interesting. I remember when we had Ian Cron on the podcast and you discovered you're an Enneagram 1. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting what he says about under stress, people with your Enneagram type kind of double down on, nope, this has got to be the way. You can tend to get a little, controlling. And he says they believe that there are 2 ways to do things, their way and the wrong way. And so this idea of understanding like, hey, there's some emotion if I kind of come at it with what's naturally in. Me to do. Mm-hmm. And so I can see how that's something that you've had to learn and build in, because I definitely feel the same way.
Yeah. And it's, again, I just, as a fix-it person, and especially in a corporate environment where we don't have time for all these emotions, we just need to just do better. Here's what you did, move on. But, you fix your car, you don't fix other people. Nobody wants to be fixed, and nobody wants to feel like they're being fixed, and it doesn't work anyway. Right. So we might as well just acknowledge we got to deal with what happened, but let's create space for the emotional side of this, because, we're emotional beings, and difficult conversations, the emotions, they're front and center, especially if somebody knows you're about to have a difficult conversation. So one of the things that helps me with this is Diane, my assistant, because again, I've got 30 minutes or an hour and we need to have this conversation and move on. And she will, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, she'll say, now remember, they're a words of affirmation person, or they're a acts of service person. So she'll remind me of their love language, then she'll remind me of their Enneagram, and she'll remind me of their temperament. It's like, Andy, remember, you're going to want to talk about information. This is a whole person.
Right.
And honestly, just those simple reminders before a conversation help me step back away from just what happened and what do we need to talk about, to take into account how they're going to process this, what's going to be the biggest potential withdrawal.
Yeah, what'll trigger it.
What'll trigger it. And that's one of the things that I thought was so interesting last week with Sheila talking about those withdrawals. We'll get to those in just a minute with identity. So again, just remembering going in, it's not just about the information. And again, her point is there are 3 levels of conversation, and they're all happening at the same time.
I know.
And we can either not be aware of them and wonder why didn't that go well, or we can remember these 3, and we'll keep unpacking in this conversation. And so it was so fascinating. And of course, I couldn't help but think about things at home with kids, with Sandra. Just this is true there. It's true in the neighborhood. It's true in the grocery store. It's true everywhere we go. So what happened? The emotional component, and then the identity component.
And I thought it was interesting. She talked about that executive education class that they do in Triad, and they set up this premise of what are you listening for? And they have some people just listen for facts or like the what happened, and they have some people just listen for feelings. And she said the questions you ask will elevate one or the other. So if you're asking, and then what happened next? And then what did you do? You'll go facts. It's going to elevate that. But the people that are listening for feelings are elevating, and how did that make you feel? And how did that lead you to feel in that moment? Or
you name it, you say, that must have been so frustrating.
Right.
That would have really bothered me. That would have really made me just shut down. You just name them. And again, for all the parents listening, home is where you practice with this, and the stakes are lower in some cases, especially if you have younger kids. And one of the illustrations in a little seminar I did all those years ago was, and I mentioned this briefly last week, was your son or daughter comes home and says, "I hate my math teacher," and the natural response is to say, "What happened?" And again, they've just delivered a big emotion.
Right.
We bypass it and go to what happened. That's a miss. So when our kids or anybody around us begins the conversation with emotion, if we can remember to stay there, and it really is a skill that we learn to stay there. Wow, yeah, I can tell you're really upset. Whatever that was, that must have been terrible. It was terrible. Well, now I've affirmed what you're feeling. I don't say, now we don't hate people in our home. Now I'm correcting. They start with emotion. Now I'm correcting.
And now you shut them down.
Oh, of course. I've said you shouldn't feel this way, and I don't even know what happened.
Right.
And so if we can just remember, affirm those emotions, then people feel understood, and the conversation won't be necessarily as difficult. So those are kind of those first 2, what happened and the emotional side. And then this whole identity piece, that was fascinating, wasn't it?
I think that was, like we said earlier, I think that's the thing that was the revelation in the book of, oh, wow, when I got that reaction, I stepped on a piece of someone's identity. And it was a little bit, it was a little bit unexpected to think that conversation is happening while the other 2 are also happening. And good communicators can navigate all 3 as they're having these difficult conversations. I thought it was fascinating.
And I thought, too, the thing that helped me understand this the most was when she talked about, and she talks about this in the book, when I can remember, oh, yeah, I have an identity. We all do, and sometimes we're not aware of it. And by identity, we're talking about how you basically define yourself. I'm an honest person. I've always been an honest person. So if you accuse me, as she talked about, of being dishonest, wow, that was a landmine, because she has so created an identity for herself around being honest because of something in her past. So our identity is a combination of, here's something I'm really good at, that I think I'm really good at and has been affirmed my whole life, so I'm good at this. It's how I perceive myself. It's how I rate myself. It's what allows me to feel like I'm a good person. And it's a little bit different for all of us. And again, a lot of us don't know what those things are. But when somebody accidentally touches one of those things in a negative way, it feels insulting. It's not just correcting. I feel insulted.
Yes.
And so when we can understand that about ourselves, then I realize, okay, every person that I have a conversation with, a positive or challenging conversation, they have an internal identity as well. And to the degree I can figure out or guess a little bit about what that might be, it's easier to stay away from those things, or
avoid the landmines.
Avoid them, or to say to them, and we talked a little bit about this last week, to say, hey, before we have this difficult conversation, I just want you to know, I think you are a fantastic leader. The people that work with you, they respect you so much, so I'm affirming what I know is part of their identity.
Right.
Just kind of separate out what happened and how it made you feel peace. So as we think about who we're married to, as we think about the things that our children, how they define themselves in terms of what makes them kind of who they are, to take those things into consideration during challenging or difficult conversations, it is so important. But this is tricky. But again, as we figure out the person in the mirror, it's a reminder of, oh yeah, the person on the other side of me has one of these on the inside of them as well. Yeah.
And it was interesting to me that you said, as it relates to your kind of identity as a communicator and your identity as a leader, the thing that cuts deepest for you is your identity as a leader.
Yeah.
I honestly was a little surprised to hear that.
I was surprised. I mean, this was just sort of a mental exercise I went through as I read the book and as I thought about the conversation with her, the whole identity piece, because I thought, okay, I was thinking of other people.
Yeah.
How does she identify? And again, we're kind of guessing. But in thinking about that, I realized when people criticize my communication, and by criticize, I mean, we do reviews all the time between services, or you get an evaluation, and everybody wants to score high, and people tell me, oh, you're such a great communicator, and I'm like, thank you. But when my leadership decisions, or somebody takes a dig at poor leadership, that, I don't know the better word, that hurts my feelings more than the other. And I think if somebody were to take a shot at my parenting, because I think I'm a good dad, so all those things, and we all have a list of 3 or 4 to identify what they are.
And the deeper levels of them.
Yes.
I mean, because you're saying these are deeper for me than things you naturally think are.
Right. If you tell me I'm not a good singer, yeah, I know, right? Or if you tell me your handwriting's terrible, oh, I know. Or, Andy, we can't let you organize something because you're not a good, I know. That didn't hurt my feelings.
But even things you're good at, like communication, you're saying that's not as deep as some of these other things.
So I think figuring those things out about ourselves may be important, but the point is to remember the person on the other side of us is carrying those things well. And if I take a dig accidentally in having a difficult conversation at something that they feel like is fundamental to who they are, that's a landmine. And we don't always know what they are, but I just thought that was a really interesting part of the conversation.
For sure. Well, changing gears, Sheila talked about some common mistakes people make in navigating difficult conversations.
Yep.
She talked about avoiding and postponing the conversation, which has to be the most common, I would think. I mean, it really just has to be.
And that's temperament driven to some extent.
Yeah.
Or schedule driven, but
it could be schedule driven or turning the conversation into a blame game or lack of preparation. And I would love to hear, how do you prepare for a conversation you know is going to be difficult? How do you prepare beforehand for that kind of conversation? Because I feel like you're great at being calm in the midst of conflict. So how do you prepare for that?
Well, I kind of kidded her. I said, most people prepare for the difficult conversation on their way to work, in the car, because we have those conversations in our head and we know what we're going to say and we imagine what they're going to say and we're always wrong, right?
Yeah, but you're ready to react to what's in your head that they're going to say, yeah.
The whole idea of preparing for a difficult conversation at the level that she surfaced, I think I'd fall way short of that, because these 3 things are the template for preparing for a difficult conversation. What happened? I need to be super clear. Here's what the problem is. And part of the preparation is, okay, how is this going to make them feel? And I need to go ahead and just affirm those emotions. Hey, this is going to be challenging. I don't want to, this is going to feel personal. Just, hey, it's okay, whatever you're about to feel. And then to ask the question, okay, does this conversation, does it cross over into identity? Am I about to talk about something that's so, not just personal to them, but that is defining to them?
Yeah.
And again, the easiest illustration is, to criticize a mother about her ability to be a good mother. So that's, mother's an identity, right? Or father, you haven't been a good father to your, okay, wait, let's
Don't go there. You cannot go there.
No, but if I've made a mistake in disciplining a child and somebody challenges me on that, they're just talking about what happened.
Right.
But I feel that much deeper. You have just impinged upon how I identify as a father, and I tend to think I'm a good father. So again, it's easy to see in those roles.
Right.
But at work, we carry some sense of identity as well. I pride myself in my communication. I pride myself in my organization. I pride myself in handling details, and you've just come down hard on me because I let a bunch of details slip. Are you kidding? I'm like the best detail person. So in terms of preparing for difficult conversations, again, clarity on what happened, sensitivity to the emotion, and then, okay, what are the potential pitfalls when it comes to how this person, the identity they carry at work? And that's tricky.
Yeah, and I think it's really great that, as Sheila mentioned, her group, and you can go find all this information in the show notes, has come up with some templates to help you prepare well, because what you just said is your own emotions are getting high, and sometimes it's hard to go, okay, wait a minute, what am I facing on the other side? But taking the time to go, okay, no, I'm going to work through a process and think through those things is super important. So,
can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Because she touched on this at the end. She talked about, these aren't her words, this is kind of our words, but that confrontation really is an expression of showing value to the other person. It's caring.
It is caring.
Yeah, if I don't care, I don't confront, because I don't, that's the best she can do. What's the point of having the conversation? She's doing the best she can. We just let it go. Okay, well, that may be true, but that's not honoring, that's not challenging, that's not mentoring up and leading up or trying to lift the person up.
And clear is kind. Being clear with somebody who's not performing the way you expect is a kindness.
Yes.
Rather than just putting up with it.
Right. It's the honesty, it's kindness. So again, when it comes to difficult conversations, they feel so negative. We dread them for the most part, or we should. For the person that's looking forward to it, they're not ready for it, right? Because they haven't taken the other person into consideration. They just want to get it out and move on. And when I'm unhealthy, that's me. I just want to have that meeting because I can put a check in the box. I'm going to move on. Terrible leadership's unhealthy. But again, when we get this right, we're doing the other person a favor. And the reason everybody listening knows that's true, because they've been on the other side of difficult conversations. And as I said last week, the best bosses and managers we've had in our careers were those that would sit us down and say, hey, you messed this up, or this could have been better, or hey, I know you think you did a good job, and you did do a good job, but I know you, and you are capable of more.
Yeah.
And, you're the best. You did better than anybody else, but you are winging it, and you can do better. And I have been challenged, almost with those words verbatim when I compared myself to some other people. I'm like, I did better than everybody else. And my boss sat me down and said, you're winging it. You are capable of more, and chastised me. But here I am talking about that conversation. So
it inspired you, obviously.